George Robertson, Labour Party candidate, 18,880. And that George Robertson has been duly elected to serve as Member of Parliament for the Hamilton constituency.
Thank you very much, Councillor.
It is the witching hour last night, and the new Labour MP for the Scottish constituency of Hamilton enjoys every moment of it. There is double satisfaction for George Robertson. In what will now almost certainly be election year, he has given Prime Minister Jim Callaghan cheer and brought the Scottish National Party bandwagon to an abrupt halt in the very town where it began its spectacular journey.
In this election, we put the issue, the great constitutional issue of this time of independence or separation clearly, and we asked the people of Hamilton on behalf of the people of Scotland to make a decision on it. That decision has been taken, and the ramifications of that decision will echo well beyond Hamilton and well beyond Scotland.
I can recall them very vividly as if it was yesterday. I didn't think at the outset of the campaign that I was doing more than trying to get a respectable second for my party, because it was a 16,500 majority. But, you know, I got the usual disease that candidates get, winning-itis. All candidates think they're winning, even if they lose the deposit subsequently. And I got that disease, but seriously, the last week I thought it was on the cards I might win. And it was a marvellous thing, but I didn't think of myself at that moment. I thought of all the workers.
Both Labour and Conservative parties have lost ground in Scotland, while the SNP has climbed from 2.5% to over 30% in their share of the votes. This brought them 11 seats in the last election, but almost none in Scotland's industrial heartland around Glasgow, which is why Hamilton was so important. Although most of the pits that once earned Hamilton its livelihood have closed, it remains a working-class town, and from the start, for all the songs and flags, the SNP campaign had about it the air of shouting into a cold and unfriendly wind.
To the Scottish National Party, the party with Scotland's interests at heart, make sure you vote for...
Yet in Margo MacDonald, they had fielded probably their best possible candidate, a local girl, bred and buttered in these stern streets, and with experience of having been a Glasgow MP for 4 months before the February 1974 election.
Just about the worst houses in this area. They've been up, I think, what, about 10 years, Callum?
10 years already.
10 years. They're almost uninhabitable, I'm not joking. And the week before the election, what do you know, the Under-Secretary for State for Housing comes to visit.
It was not just junior ministers who came rushing to the aid of the party. Labour was taking no chances. Cabinet ministers were called upon to do their duty. Chancellor Denis Healey set off with the air of a man making his first trip up the Zambezi River, but he had done his homework.
Yeah. And I hadn't realised that Livingston lived so near.
That's right, just up the road in Blackpool.
Ed was writing a book party about Mary Moffat. His wife.
Chancellor, there's an awful lot of ministers coming up here for this campaign. Is there a special reason for that?
Well, we all look forward to a big Labour victory, and we want to take some of the credit for it.
No separatism was Labour's message, and Mr. Healey delivered it with the panache of a favourite uncle. The genuine warmth of the welcome for the Chancellor boded ill for the SNP.
How old is she?
She's just over a year old.
Next week?
Yeah.
You'll wear one of our stickers then,
She's just beginning to trot around, I expect, is she? That's right.
And I suppose I'm the only one with, you know, political experience in that I've been an MP before. But I'm the only one with experience in this area. Does that count for anything when you're deciding what way you're going to vote?
Well, I don't know. I'll need to sit down and really think about it. I haven't really thought too much about it at the moment.
Well, what's the only thing that's different in the British economy over the last 4 years?
I know what you want me to say. You want me to bring in Scotland's wealth and all the rest that could stand ourselves. Well, I beg to differ there. I need to get that point out a lot more clearly.
So where have the nationalists failed? Political analyst Dr. Jack Brand is a member of the SNP, but a critical one.
I think that the major problem about the SNP is that it hasn't been able to lock itself into the economic issues in Scotland in the last few years anyway. The SNP has tried to say, we're the party that's going to look after Scotland. But on the other hand, there's another party, named the Labour Party, who appears to be doing it relatively well, controlling the situation. It hasn't got any worse. Anyway, it hasn't got obviously worse. And since that party's in power just now, and obviously is competent and so on, let's just stay away from the SNP because we don't know too much about them. They may not be able to handle it. You know, let's play safe.
What you're saying surely is that the SNP have failed to convince the Scottish working class in particular that they will in fact be better off and that Scotland's economy will be better run and better off under independence.
Undoubtedly that's true, yes, that's right.
The basic contention was that Scotland is too poor, the Scots people are too weak, the Scots people are too stupid to do what other economies in the world are managing to do just now. And that is...
Margo MacDonald strove at every opportunity to make the economic case for independence. But in a constituency where 11% of the workforce are on the dole, there was an understandable caution. It seemed as if the voters were saying better the crisis we know than the new one we may create for ourselves.
That you ignore the fact that in this campaign the Labour candidate has got as close to the working class as I have got to the man in the moon.
We're needing a change in Scotland, the whole of Scotland. We're needing the SNP.
Scotland will never be able to stand alone.
They can.
They can't stand alone. What do we produce? They're shutting your coal mines. You're talking about your oil. What else has Scotland got?
Who is they?
They've got nothing else in Scotland.
Excuse me, who's they?
What are you doing in there? They're part of an English firm that we'll need to rely on. But that's all Scotland's got.
Lark Hall Miners' Welfare Club. It is customary in Scotland to refer to Lark Hall as the birthplace of socialism. If that is so, there are men here who remember the Labour pains. Yet in 1967, Winnie Ewing succeeded in capturing a substantial part of the Lark Hall vote. It was probably the SNP's most successful foray into the working class heartland. But in 1978, not only was it difficult to find Margo supporters, it was almost impossible to find anyone who would admit to having strayed from the socialist path in the past. Again, the SNP's failure to make an economic case for independence seemed crucial.
All they can talk about is North Sea oil, the revenue coming off the North Sea oil. For instance, Margo MacDonald is going about saying that each individual person in Scotland is going to receive £3 per head per week. Now, let's take it now. That's coming to close to £30 million. To me, it's pie in the sky. That's my honest opinion on it.
No, I say Scotland couldn't go it alone.
Did you vote for the SNP back in '67?
No, I did not.
But a lot of your friends must have done.
Well, I know.
Why did they vote for them then?
They were protesting against the Labour government.
Do you want the devolution and the assembly that you're going to get from the Labour government?
Well, I think it's still... I would like to be independent. Don't get me wrong, I would like the Scotland to be independent, but I don't think we could go it alone. We'll still be... We couldn't run it ourselves. We'll still need behind the Westminster.
So if you want an independent Scotland, but you won't vote for the SNP?
I don't think they can do it. I don't think so.
So, has the SNP been snookered by recent failures? Winnie Ewing, now MP for Moray and Nairn, thinks not and evokes Labour's own heritage to argue her case.
Well, you expect more of us in the timescale than you've expected of the Labour Party if you're a student of political history, because it took the Labour Party, after all, obviously in a class war issue, going for the working class vote, 50 years to get one MP, Keir Hardie. And when he lost his seat, the press and the media said that's the end of that. But of course, by hindsight, we know that was a silly thing to say, because a grassroots movement with a real ideological purpose doesn't go away. If I look back from the days of Hamilton to now, I find myself almost amazed by how much progress we've made. Because when I was the MP for Hamilton, there were very many constituencies that didn't exist as even an association. And now we take it for granted we fight every seat. We fight most regional and district seats. We take this for granted. Now, 11 years ago, that wasn't the position. It's a fantastic transformation.
I think that it's fairly true to say that there have been about 3/4 of the Scottish electorate in favour of devolution for a long, long time. I mean, almost as long as polls have been done on this kind of thing, which really goes back to the 1940s. But on the other hand, if you ask people what's the most important thing the government should do something about, what the government ought to be doing in this country, then a very small proportion actually mention devolution. I think that the issue that comes up highest is prices or unemployment, and that's a way of about 50 or 60% of the people say that that's the most important thing. And when you come to devolution, only about 17 or even less, 15, 14% of the people say that that's an important issue. But I think that's not the only reason why the SNP hasn't done terribly well recently. I think that the other problem is that for some reason, it hasn't managed to project itself. It stayed too much the same party as the one that won the Hamilton by-election last time, the one that did well in February and October 1974. It hasn't gone forward, hasn't moved. The personnel of the leadership hasn't changed very much. And somehow it just needs to have a different image and to show that it's moving on with the times.
1971 was the time when we really began to realise how important oil was going to be to the Scottish economy, and we did a lot of research on it. And towards the end of 1971, we were beginning to realise that this was the issue we were looking for, to crystallise the whole theme that we've been plugging for years, that Scotland was a fully self-sufficient country, and this dramatised it.
Donald Bain helped to create the oil campaign, but has it played out?
On the contrary, the oil issue has only just started. And I think that the SNP has really got to get to grips with it and spell out to the people of Scotland how this major resource, it's the greatest single resource that Scotland has at the present time, is being depleted at a rate which is much too great and where no tangible benefits whatsoever are coming to Scotland. And we've got to get back onto the oil theme. I think this is going to be the key to our future success.
As a matter of fact, I don't think that the oil issue was very important in the growth of Scottish nationalism. Most people in Scotland, if you ask them about oil, don't really think that oil will make much difference to the Scottish economy. Certainly if you ask them about this in the west of Scotland, in Glasgow and Clyde Valley, people think that the economy of Scotland is in a very bad way, despite the fact there are these thousands of millions of gallons of oil coming in every year. People still think that what counts to improve the Scottish economy is some kind of economic revival based on industry in the country. And of course oil isn't industry. Oil doesn't give very many jobs, and in fact it's beginning to give fewer and fewer jobs. So although oil was a little gimmick, if you like, a little issue, and it maybe served to put a little peak in the curve of votes, I don't think it did very much.
The new focus of political debate within the SNP is the government's Scottish Devolution Bill, for soon Scotland will enjoy its greatest degree of self-government since the Act of Union in 1707. This former Edinburgh Boys High School will house Scotland's new Assembly. But there are those in the SNP who believe that by offering devolution that stops short of independence, English politicians have pulled a fast one.
The Assembly and devolution has never been asked for by anybody in Scotland. It's never been asked for by the SNP. It's always been something that's come from the British government to try and find one way of neutralising us. I think the initial reaction of the party was good when we heard them discussing things at Assembly. It meant we had them in the run. This was great news. We are upsetting the British establishment. We're going to get places. But as it's going on, instead of taking that and attacking the Assembly and saying, look at this Assembly you're giving us, it's useless. It's like Rabbi Burns says, you're bought and sold for English gold.
The government's been quite clever, hasn't it?
It's been splendid. I mean, the Tory party have been fairly rubbish. They haven't come up with anything at all. They've just made themselves a bigger mess. But I don't think it's been the Cabinet. I think they've got some really bright people, and they've worked for 10 years, and they've come up with a devolution thing, and they say this is how to handle the SNP, and they're handling us fairly well. I mean, all credit to them for that. And I think this is, at least with them committing themselves to that way, I don't see why we should be the goody-goody people, just like the Liberal parties, having a pact with the government. As long as we support an Assembly, it's a first opinion before independence, or a first step. we're more or less in the same on a pike with the Labour government without signing any papers with them. We're helping maintain them in power.
Alec Ewing's a great guy, but I think he's talking through a hole in his head, frankly, because in all of the opinion polls that are done, the SNP is seen by the electors as being good for Scotland because we have started this movement towards self-government. Now, I think perhaps we've been a bit remiss in defining exactly what we mean, the SNP means, by self-government or independence. And I think probably we've stood still in the last year when we've had this big government and opposition campaign about separatism is bad for you. In this particular by-election, I've been trying to get them to see what separatism is, because it's a pejorative expression, and people, I do think, have a horror of being separated artificially in a social sense or in an economic sense from the rest of the UK. Now, independence as defined by the SNP doesn't envisage that at all. It envisages the very opposite, in fact. And I think probably that Alec Ewing, who incidentally is one parliamentary candidate out of 71 in the SNP, I don't think he would get a seconder if he stood up in an SNP conference and tried to argue the case that by bringing the whole concept of self-government into focus and allowing people to determine how it's going to evolve, that the SNP has done the independence cause a disservice. He's just wrong.
Is the day that we have a parliament in Scotland, because whatever you call it, it's a parliament, the media must report it, its doings, its decisions are important. If there is a conflict with Westminster over money or powers, you've got a situation across the board of whatever parties are in that parliament, they're going to be irritated if they want to do something in a policy way for an industry or for any idea that the Parliament produces, maybe about law, whatever. And then Westminster says you can't have the money, or we don't agree that you've got the power to do that. I can only see that Parliament being reshaped by the people of Scotland and their elected representatives of whatever party in a direction of more power. So the big crunch is getting the Parliament.
There are those who believe that the SNP has lost votes in Scotland because of its poor record in local government. Will it be able to do any better in the Scottish Assembly? Jack Brand has his doubts.
We don't know how the SNP is going to perform in that Assembly. Now, it's got to perform in the Assembly a lot better than it's performed in local government. In 1968 in local government, its performance was disastrous and probably lost it a lot of votes at the succeeding general election in 1970. Its performance in local government in the regions and the districts hasn't been quite as bad this time, but it hasn't been seen to be good. If you go back, incidentally, to the Labour Party coming in at the beginning of this century, you get exactly the same kind of thing with new people going in as Labour councillors. Suddenly, I mean, they're taken aback by the fact that there was all this work to do, and they couldn't find the time to do it. So it was a disaster, because the SNP councillors, many of them, I would argue the majority of them, performed very badly, and were seen to perform badly, because the press, who had got tremendous copy out of the SNP victories, now got copy out of the fact that the new SNP councillors were behaving in a very grotesque way, many of them, trying to cope with the demands that the council were making on them. So that's what I mean by disaster.
As the votes mounted up last night, it soon became clear that the SNP cause was lost. The polls had forecast an even worse defeat, which gave comfort of a kind to Margo MacDonald.
In your heart, it was a bad result, was it not?
No, not really. No, to be absolutely honest, it wasn't. Our canvass said 34%, and therefore, on a slightly lower turnout than's normal here, we took almost 34%. So therefore, I'm relieved, to be honest, that we fought the sort of campaign we did, and we got that sort of result.
Does it occur to you that perhaps as a party you have in fact just served your purpose for the Scottish people, that the Scottish people want the devolution which your support has gained them, but they don't want, in the last analysis, the independence that you demand?
I think the mood in Scotland at present, amongst most people, is to try this idea out of Scottish self-government. But the logic of the thing will prevail, because the reason for wanting self-government is to improve our economy and to improve our whole estimation of ourselves. and what our objectives are and what our aspirations are. That's the reason for self-government.
Is it not possible in any way for you to look at your party and to believe that in fact you are failing to get your message across sufficiently to the working class, that you're failing to convince the working class that independence and economic prosperity go together?
It's a hard fight, especially in a very traditional working class labour area like this, because there's massive unemployment here and there's not very much hope for youngsters coming out of school. And so therefore I think that people who are as far down in their hopes as that at the moment, they're unwilling perhaps to try anything that's a bit radical, because better the devil you know. But that changes because they've put their hope in the Labour Party, and the Labour Party can't fulfil that hope.
Dr. Brown, there are those in the main political parties in London who are already getting the nails out to drive into the coffin of the SNP. Do you believe the party's wane is irreversible?
No, I don't think that its wane's irreversible. In the first place, it's important to remember that it's gone down and come up before. So this is not the first time it's had the problem. Secondly, I think that too many people have voted for the SNP now for too many times not to identify themselves as SNP voters. If they'd simply voted once and then the whole thing had gone away, then they might have gone back to the Labour Party or to the Conservative Party, but I think that's less easy. All parties have their ups and downs, and therefore the SNP, not surprisingly, has to go through a down period, and that's now. But it's going to come to an up period, I think, when the economy starts to collapse, or collapse visibly.
Hamilton is a battle lost, but not the war. It may seem a poor prospect for a political party that its best hope lies in economic disaster, but the nationalist song is not done. Scots Wha Hae, the party's anthem, was written by Robert Burns with both Bannockburn and the French Revolution in mind. The Scottish Revolution has been postponed due to lack of interest. It would be an unwise Westminster politician who believed it had been cancelled.